Sorry about that. So somebody came to my office door and I had to stop for a few minutes. So we were talking about mono and stereo. So they've always need to be talked about when you're talking about physical states of tension. So when you're thinking about where you want tension in the body and how you want to be acting, you should be thinking, am I working in mono or am I working in stereo? So mono is when the physical intention is clearly matched by the intention that's going on up here. So think about somebody being very, very stressed about missing an exam. So up here in their head, they're really worried that they're going to miss the exam. So their body is tense. They might be in tension state 5 or 6. So their breathing might be shallow. There might be a lot of anxiety in their hands. You might see a lot of stiffness in the body. And exactly the same is going on up here. So the mind is racing. They're sort of losing the will. They're confused. They're angry. They're annoyed. So everything's matching. The whole body and the mind are matching. So that is working in mono. Working in stereo, on the other hand, the really great example that I always go back to because it's funny and it's easy to remember is the person that is playing it cool with somebody that they really fancy. So they're working in stereo because there's two things going on. Their physical intention is that they've got to play it cool. This person, yeah, they really fancy them, but you know, they're gonna sit back and just play it cool with them. They're gonna play the waiting game. But up in their mind, they really fancy that person, and they've seen them walking down the corridor and they're thinking, oh my goodness, they are so whatever. But their body, they're all pretending that they're really relaxed. So the body might be in tension state number 2, the Californian. So sitting back in a chair, yeah, I'm playing it cool, look at me, I'm Mr. Cool, I'm Miss Cool. But actually their mind is in tension state 5 or 6 because the intention is to go and snog this person because they fancy them. So that's working in stereo. Okay, so stereo is 2 things going on. Think of a stereo with 2 speakers. 2 things are happening, and mono is 1 when everything is matched. Okay, so that is mono and stereo. Next thing we did this week, well actually let me recap countermasking quickly. A few of you are describing it in slightly odd ways in your journal, so I want you to go back and think about how you write and explain what countermasking is the very first time you introduce it in your journal. So countermasking is when you're playing an attitude or emotion that is counter or different to the one that is expressed on the mask. So your mask has got one fixed expression. You can't do anything about that. It's either grumpy or it's sad. So when you countermask, you're playing a different expression on top of that one. And that is essential to making the masks work. If you only ever play your mask in the fixed expression, you'll never get much out of it. It'll be a bit flat and it won't go anywhere. So make sure you go over what you've said already about countermasking. And when you talk about it, use an example. Give examples of times that we've seen it. So I go back to Lottie's brilliant wearing of her mask. We saw Reese wearing it, Xander wearing it, then Lottie put it on and she countermasked it really, really differently. So try and explain why that worked. Also, just a couple of days ago on Monday, Jim countermasked brilliantly. We had the line set up. I can't remember what activity it was. You were coming in and we were doing the gesture work, and I'd said that I was saying to Jim, that somebody was filming and did he mind? Well, I was saying to all of you, do you mind the fact that somebody's filming you? And Jim completely countermasked his mask and he looked straight out at the audience and pointed to somebody and said, no, I don't want you filming. And that's what he was saying in his inner monologue. And because before that the mask had looked quite vulnerable and quite low status, that moment was brilliant counter-masking. So try and explain why that was good. Okay. Last thing then is the gesture work that we've done this week. So on Monday we looked at gesture. It's called gesture lines actually. So we looked at sort of the rules of working with gesture, and I'm just going to read you what it says, what I sort of write about gesture. So when gestures are placed at certain levels of the body, they carry with them subliminal meanings. So this happens all the time in real life. We don't realise that when people are using gestures with us, that they've got these hidden meanings because we understand the language so much. But when you take away speech, like you get in full masks, you as the performers wearing the masks need to understand how to replace that speech with something. So we're replacing the speech with the language of gestures. So we're talking about gestures at different levels of the body having different meanings. So the first level that we looked at was gestures that happen below the waist. So I'll stand up for this. So we talked about gestures that were below the waist being quite offhand, quite dismissive and not important. So yeah, that's fine. No, I'm not bothered. Yeah, it's fine. Hurry up. Yeah, not. So anything down here below the waist, it's not important, it's not worthwhile, throw away. Almost the action almost says what the gesture means. It's not important, it's throw away. I can do without it. Dismissive, they look dismissive, these gestures, so that's a good one. And then we move up to the waist, to the stomach. So we talked about the stomach, gestures from the stomach. I need to stand up again. Having an honesty and a truthfulness about them, and that's because they're associated with this idea of having a gut reaction to something. You know, you feel something in your belly, what your gut reaction is. So gestures sort of down here being honest and truthful and having a certain warmth about them. So they're quite motherly gestures. Think of like a big sort of pregnant motherly belly. So those sorts of gestures, and they're often a lot slower, and it might be somebody really saying something to you and explaining it. So they're all very warm and they're all very honest and they're all very open. Okay? Next we move up to the chest. So gestures from here are pleading, heartfelt, personal. So the hands often come into it a lot there. Please, can you do this? Oh, please, I'm begging you, please. And it's all coming from here. It's all very, it's all very pleading and personal. Okay? And then we talk about the gestures that are above the head. So we know when we get up into tension states, sort of 5 and 6, gestures start moving above the head, certainly above the shoulders, because once we're up here, it's all quite manic, it's all quite uncontrollable, you don't know what you're doing, everything's up here, it's all very chaotic. Okay, and Xander got that in the session, you guessed that, and you showed some, and that was pretty good. So there are gesture lines. So we've looked at mono and stereo, recapped over counter-masking, and looked at gesture lines. Make sure every time you're talking about things that we've done in the session, you can explain little exercises briefly. I think that's quite a nice way of doing it. But if you're doing that, make sure you're saying why things were effective. So say if somebody used effective gestures, why they were effective. Remember Reese in the gesture lines exercise this week did some really great offhand gestures with that really grumpy intermediate mask he had on. Try and go back and say why things were effective and why they worked. I hope you're getting on well with your journals. You're doing really well practically. Naomi was so impressed in the session on Monday that she came into. She said that, you know, full mask stuff is pretty hard, and she said she thought you picked up all the techniques really well. So I think you're doing great, so well done. I'm really looking forward to going on the trip on the 10th. Hopefully everybody's sorted out a place to stay or how they can get home. I know it's difficult for some of you, but this is all part of being here, is overcoming these problems. And then very excitingly, I think we've got a workshop booked with Vamos as well. Obviously we couldn't do it after the show in Monmouth because it's a bit late, but I found a bit of money in the budget, and I think that we can get them in to run a workshop the week before you do your show, which I think will be a really good recap of all the techniques for you while you're in the middle of all your rehearsals. So well done everybody. Now I'm going to turn this off. Bye.